So, did we fix it or did we break it? I mean, that's the question I want to ask today. My name is Kris Buytaert. I've been standing on stages at Open Source Conference for the past 2 decades, I guess. You might know me from starting DevOps days, from starting config management camp. A bunch of you obviously curse when they run into the next DNS problem, because that's the title of my blog. But Bernd was talking about a lot of history. And, oh yeah, I work for Ulf.eu. Ulf is a brand for Inuits. We focus on open source observability. We maintain the Prometheus long-term support release. But I was basically going back to Bernd, who was saying the complete history of Icinga, or Icinga, or... So let's dive into the history of open source monitoring. And as it happens to be, back in 2008, so that's before the fork, I wrote a really long paper for the Ottawa Linux Symposium comparing everything that's out there. Well, we narrowed it down to a bunch of things and eventually came up with like 5 or 6 tools. And what we figured out back then is that there was a lot of bloated Java tools where your memory footprint was 10 times the actual size of the application you were monitoring. There was a bunch of dysfunctional open core software, like Xenos and stuff like that. Some of the tools out there, like Zabbix, if I had a rack with, well, 2 racks with 40 machines in there, I needed a DBA to actually have the tool monitored. And Nagios back then was the tool of choice for most of us in that industry. And it wasn't fun. So it was no surprise that a couple years later, John Vincent on Twitter, back when it was still cool to be there, tweeted like, hey, monitoring sucks. And he had a bunch of reasons why, for him, monitoring sucked. And a bunch of them were really valid. Like, OK, he loved monitoring, but there was also the thing that a lot of these tools were manual configuration with a user interface, and they were always out of sync compared to what you were actually monitoring. Lots of people were just monitoring the host, like, is this thing still on? And maybe sometimes looking at the services, like, oh, I still get Apache is still running. But looking at if the actual application you were serving was still working, that was most of the time not happening. So monitoring systems were out of sync with what we actually cared about. And alert fatigue, I mean, this is 15 years ago almost, was a real thing. Like the amount of times you walk into a NOC and you basically see the monitoring screen really huge and it's all red. Familiar for some of you? And if it's all red, if you go from 301 red entries to 302, you just don't care anymore. So monitoring really, really sucked. And then back, even that same year, DevOps Days Rome. Anybody who was there? Bernd, were you there? Rome? No, you were? No. So DevOps Days Rome, we had Ignites there, and Ulf Mansson, back then at Recorded Future, gave a 5-minute lightning talk about his newfound love for monitoring. And he had his kids draw the slides, and I finally met the kid who drew these slides like last week. No, not last month, sorry. But he was really talking about how, for him back then, Sensu as a new modern tool, but mainly the combination with automation was really what gave him that newfound love. Like, he was able to build a platform through automation, and he was certain that what he was monitoring was also what he was caring about. Obviously, we did that with Icinga. I remember the first Icinga camp in San Francisco where I was talking about how to do this with Puppet, and I think there's going to be a talk today, this afternoon, about monitoring Icinga and Puppet, and tomorrow about doing it with Ansible. But for a lot of us, the fact that we were not manually generating our configuration anymore, and that when we provisioned a service or we decommissioned the service, it was automatically updated. That gave us back that newfound love for monitoring, and it solved so many problems for us. Like, alert fatigue was gone. We could come to a point where we could really memorize the amount of issues that were actually happening in our infrastructure. And Bram Vogelaar, an old colleague of mine, said, well, if you got 15,000 services you're monitoring, you want to have maximum of 5% of things that are really something that you care about, because then you can still keep it in your mind. And that's where we ended up. Like, we had healthy monitoring. We had on-call engineers who said, hey, what was I on call last week? I don't remember. I mean, I didn't get any page. And it was reality. And then things started to change. So automation brought back that love. So why aren't we all sipping cocktails on the beach? Well, we fixed monitoring for a bunch of us, but it wasn't evenly distributed. Not everybody understood the real benefits of automating everything. They automated only parts of it. They automated the wrong things. They adopted the tools, but didn't adopt the practices. So things changed. Cloud happened. I mean, when Icinga was forked, 2009, who was on Amazon? Not that many people. Who was actually having private clouds? Not that many people. And then containers happened. I mean, containers were around but long before, but containers became popular, containers became usable. And where the automation had brought us from 2 physical servers in a rack to 2 physical servers with virtual machines in a rack to, I don't know where is running where, things evolved. And then we got observability. Like, people wanted to see a different approach. So the ecosystem from automation to, I know it's running, I have it full under control, I have a single source of truth where I know it's in there because that's what I automated, started evolving. And people said we need to change the way we think about monitoring. It's not good enough anymore to see that the 5 web servers we care about are still responding the right way. Well, if I have 5 web servers and there's 1 down, I don't really care. I want to see that I've got sufficient traffic. I want to see that the traffic responses I get are still fast enough. And yes, that's right, if you have 5 or 50 or 500 servers. But if you only have 2, maybe you don't need to change the way you look at it. But the whole hype was, we need to look at those metrics. And everybody was shouting like, yeah, we need to look at the service level system, at the service level objectives. We need to talk about what Google's doing. We need to look at all of these numbers. But what do you do if you don't meet your objectives? Are these actionable? Like, you don't get the right 99th percentile of metrics. What are you going to do? Do you need to be paged for that? And for some organizations, you want to be paged because it's actually degrading the service you offer to your customers. But for some other organizations, like if you're an enterprise with 400 internal users and one of them is actually waiting a little bit longer, do you want to alert the on-call team for that? Are they actionable? So different types of environments have different needs for monitoring. You are not Google. And is there somebody from Google or Facebook in the room? Because then you are Google, obviously. But we see that for monitoring and for all of those other things, we jump on those hypes and we completely do things different. So Prometheus became popular. And a lot of the arguments there were like, yeah, but traditional monitoring systems cannot keep up with the constant change. Like 2 pods now, 5 now, 2000 now, it's different. I mean, they adopted this new way of looking at a platform. They adopted this metric-based monitoring. And it was kind of like, but this only works for containers. And then some people said, no, you can actually use this for the whole ecosystem. But there are some troubles with Prometheus. Like, when we had large infrastructures, we had things like graphite, we had things like RRD tool, and we kept historical metrics. And people now ditched their graphite, and they're like, I've got Prometheus now. What's the default retention of your Prometheus metrics? Does anybody know? 5 days. Well, it's definitely not the length you want. I don't think it's 5 days, it's a bit longer. But it's definitely not the tool that if you don't change it, it's going to give you patterns for a year or 2 years, unless you configure it, which most people don't. Like, we got new fun, like how many exporters are you running? How do you secure them? If you just take Prometheus out of the box, the alerts you get, the dashboards you get, it's a whole lot of work to get that working. Like, I know there's a bunch of Lego fans in the Icinga community. It's like you either go buy the jazz club with the manual, with the right bricks, and you build it, and it's fun, and it works. Or you go to Bricklink and you get all the individual pieces, and it's also cool. But it's a lot of work to get all the individual pieces from the different suppliers and to completely build that functional working monitoring system. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Prometheus for the things it brings me. It's a really vibrant community. But maybe for some people it's not enough. It's just something. Like integrating a single source of truth in it, unless you're running Kubernetes. And even then, it's hard. If you're not using Prometheus, you're left out. Sorry, if you're not using Kube, you're basically left out. So at that point, you come back to, we fixed this, right? Why are we rebuilding this? And for some people, monitoring started to suck again. Like, yeah. If you look at the argument John Vincent had back in the day, it's like, we were creating fake hosts. Like, yeah, what's the black box exporter? Like, it's basically translating the Icinga checks to a 1 or a 0 to have a metric to see it's on and off. Like, we have a zillion different exporters. And John Vincent was nagging about having to do multiple checks, one for metrics, one for monitoring. Well, we do that again. Now we do eBPF and metrics. And he was nagging about having only 5-minute intervals. Can anybody explain me how the scrape interval in Prometheus and Grafana works? Except for the persons from Grafana who are here. Yeah, you can explain me. I'm sorry, but it's a bloody mess. So I've got logs, I got metrics. And how do I integrate them all? Except if you buy into the turf of the one single vendor, it's not easy. And what is your single source of truth these days? See, for a lot of people, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, all the arguments that John Vincent was making like 13 years ago, they're still here. But we moved on. And what we notice is that, and you can do this for everything. You can do this for infrastructure as code, you can do this for databases. But what we see in the industry is, hey, there's this new fancy new tool. We're going to implement it. We're not going to fix, I'm not going to change the way we use it. So we're going to be manually configuring that tool again, because we forget about automation. And we're going to fail again. And we're going to keep repeating that over and over. So let's do this observability thing, right? I think I'm going to preach to the choir now, but what are the 3 pillars of observability? What's the first one? Metrics. What's the second one? Logs. What's the third one? Traces. Okay. What's the fourth one? The popular vote these days is profiling. I think that's actually the 5th one, because this is actually the 4th one. Actually checking if things are still on. before you jump into the observability hype, fix your beep monitoring. Please fix your monitoring. Because you're here, you're probably already knowing that you need to improve and you need to make your monitoring better. This is what I remember as the earliest observability tool. We remember PacketBeat from before PacketBeat got acquired by Elastic. I think this actually, Monica Sabru was presenting this at some OSMC years ago. I mean, you got a nice live map of things, what was happening. You got response times on SQL queries. You got all of this. And it was easy to set up. It was using PCAP. It was a bit heavy network overload. But this is what I was hoping that observability was going to bring me out of the box. And unless you're running on a kube ecosystem, up till a couple of months ago, it used to be really, really hard to get this. So how do we get there? It's like, who knows what ePPF is? Only one hand. Okay, more hands. Means you folks are awake. To me, and I know it's a bit, it's not correct, but to me it's like the marriage of S-trace on steroids and TCP dump. It's Linux kernel level. It's a framework to attach to low-level functions. It's really useful to have metrics collected and statistics collected. And it's a real nice framework to build a monitoring tool. And it's really easy to deploy if you're on a kube ecosystem. But if you're outside of it, there are so many tools. If you look at, yeah, we do ePPF-based monitoring, it's like, oh, but it only runs on kube. Oh, but it only runs on kube. Like, quick check, who has systems outside of kube in this audience? Who's running completely only on kube? So if you can only use the tools that run on kube, you have partial visibility. So that's not the reality we're in. Yes, kube is an awesome system if you have the use case, but there's a reality outside of it. So we need to have monitoring tools. We need to have tools that allow us to do the whole ecosystem. So I went searching, and I went looking at tools that would actually allow it. And each time there was a new tool popping up, it's like, oh, here's a Helm chart. No, okay, I can start building the binaries, I can start building the ePPF stuff. And then I found CoRoot. And it's cloud agnostic. It works on bare metal, on kube. I mean, for those who are still stuck on proprietary Nomad, it works on Nomad. It's eBPF-based. It ships things to an HTTP-based OTel collector. It does profiling for fun languages. It's zero instrumentation. It's not a monitoring tool. It stores its metrics in Prometheus and its other data in ClickHouse, and it's really fun. And I get this again. I mean, this is not PacketBeat, but it's really close to it. And I get to see what's broken. I get to see what's wrong. I can get alerts from it, but those alerts to me are not actionable, so I still want other things in there. And for me, this tool brought back, not my monitoring love, because that was never gone, because I was automating things and I knew that things were instinct, but this tool really brought my Ollie love. So I get to use those hearts again. And I think this is true for everybody. Like, we fixed monitoring, then we broke it again for some others, then we fixed it again. Now we can actually go beyond monitoring. And it all depends on your use case. What do you want to achieve with monitoring? How far do you go with your automation? But monitoring is always going to be depending on the culture of the organization, depending on how you deal with alerts. It's going to be either broken or fixed. And even if you fix it, at some point it's going to be broken again because of that new tool, new fancy tool you're going to pop up with. You're going to go to, well, not Amsterdam. You're going to go to one DevOps Days. You're going to find out this new fancy tool. and you're going to go like, oh, this is awesome. And you're not going to understand for the first couple of weeks how to use it, and it's going to completely break your monitoring till you fix it again. And the whole thing is you need to find an ecosystem, a tool that you love, that you like playing with, that is going to give you the benefits of happy monitoring and happy engineers who are happy to be on call. And that tool for you is Zabbix or Prometheus or Icinga, so be it. But make that choice and be happy again with your monitoring. One more thing. We're doing the small conference in Antwerp. Antwerp, I say, not Ghent, which is going to be the 15th year anniversary of DevOps Days. We're going back to where it all belongs. It's going to be 4 and 5 September. CFP is still open and the ticket sales is open. I know I'm going to see a bunch of you there, but that was basically what I wanted to tell you today.
Thank you very much, Kris. Are there any questions? And we have time for questions, because I was fast, he was faster. So we have time for questions. Or is it too early? Still a chance.
That they need more coffee.
More coffee? More sushi? Not in the morning. Oh, yeah. Please, I hand you the microphone that we get it.
You didn't ask about no cubes at all. So, if it's coming, and it will come soon for us, do you have some tips? How to get it monitored in the first place?
Isn't there a talk about cubing Icinga coming up later?
Yes, I've seen it.
If you have to dive into Prometheus, use the Prometheus operator, but then even it's still a battle. It's going to give you some benefits, but I'm still struggling with it. I mean, defining alerts, defining rules, if you're used to something like Icinga, it's going to be a huge mental change. And I still haven't found a good way to have my single source of truth map both health checks and metrics so that the alerts I get are really useful. The things I get out of the box is mostly, I mean, if you go into internet and you look at what's out there for random tools, they basically all depend on you running on Cube. If you're not running on Cube, you need to refactor all of it. And that's kind of a challenge. So there's a way to do integration, but I wouldn't drop your existing monitoring solution just yet. Those spots are really hard.
More questions? Okay, then I would say Kris is here for the next 2 days, so grab him later and ask him. Again, Kris, thank you very much for your talk.